Hello again, all you wonderful people, and welcome back to another episode of An Ecologist Plays. Now, today we are doing something quite weird. We are being very scientific with it. Now, as you can see, I have decided to really take it to the extreme, the whole idea of testing whether herbivores and fire have an impact on the vegetation that we've got in our park. And I have set up a bit of an experiment, and we're going to test a number of things here. First of all, I've got 8 blocks of smaller squares here. We've got tree, grass, tree, grass, tree, grass, tree, grass. Then in the next 5 squares, quite big ones, we've got a mixture of trees along with the 3 grass species in this first block. Then we have a whole bunch of grasses, but we also have feverberry here, which is in the croton genus. I'll talk about it a little bit later. Then we have baobabs alone, because they did quite well in our previous game, so I'm going to see how they do now. And then we've got to test whether the overgrazing will result in shrubs taking over. We've got a mixture of grasses, we've got some sedges in there as well, in their dull brownish yellowish colors. And then we've got sourberry, which is an edible berry. But the theory would be that as the grasses get overutilized by grazers, these shrubs will take over. Same with the croton that we've got over here with the feverberry. Then we have 4 bigger squares. We've got a mixture of a whole bunch of trees and grasses in the first one. We've got the 3 grasses in the second one. Again, a mixture of a bunch of grasses and trees, and the 3 grass species over here. Then we have a long strip separated from the others with the river or by the water as well. We've got mostly grasses, but also a number of feverberries in here. Again, to test whether overgrazing results in these shrubs taking over, because in theory, that is what would happen. If you've got too many grazers in an area, the grasses get knocked back quite a bit, and then the shrubs will take over, shrubs and trees. And then here we've got a patchwork. Each time we've got these 3 blocks with the 3 grass species. I want to see whether these grasses take over the savanna at different rates. So whether the Bermuda grass, which in the last video it seemed actually, although I only noticed it when I actually was editing the video, it seems that the Bermuda grass here does better than the other 2 species if you burn too frequently or if you have too many grazers. Now we're going to see whether they take over the savanna, and we're then going to see or test whether an increase in grazers in this large block that we've got over here has less of an impact than an increase in grazers in these smaller blocks. Because with the smaller blocks, they can't go anywhere. All the blocks are separated by rivers, by moats, and by roads. But in this long stretch here, the animals can move up and down if they wanted to. And in this open area here, they can also move. They can be a bit more nomadic. So I'm going to first run the simulation a little bit, let things take over, and I will be with you in about a year's time. Okay, so we're about 1 year in now, and let's have a quick look at the results. The baobabs doing amazingly. There are some baobabs that have died. On the other hand, our umbrella thorns are basically all dead for some odd reason. We're looking at the ones here. Again, as I said, all the umbrella thorn trees again here are dead. In this block here, everything seems to still be doing well. Baobab still doing well. And in this square, everything is the way we left it. Here, as always, the knob thorns surviving, baobabs doing well, and the umbrella thorns all dead. The grasses have started spreading, so they are going to be carrying on as usual, and we can see them mixing here. We've got Bermuda grass, we've got the red grass or red oats grass, and we've got love grass, all now mingling with one another. And then here we also again have a whole bunch of trees and grasses more or less existing as they should, and likewise here as well. So we've got a whole bunch of things happening, and now let's start by seeing what happens and where it is going to in fact burn first. So we throw a fire into our park, and voila, we have it started here with a tree here, but it's burning in a mixed savanna where we've got grasses and trees all together. So this is going to be very interesting to see what happens with this fire. In the meantime, let's start another fire at the same time. This time it is burning, interesting, it's burning this block here. where we had the grasses and the sour plums growing over here. Now, I don't think the sour plums here will actually recover after the fire. I think they are going to pretty much be dead. And here also, I'm not even sure whether the grasses are going to recover, because most of them are going to burn. I guess that one there may survive, I think. So it'll be interesting to see if that one then colonizes the entire bit of this little block here. We have red oats grass there as well. It's burning more or less to everywhere. Most of the areas here have burned. There's one sour plum that has survived. And there's one there as well. There was one there. There's another one there. Okay, meanwhile, this fire here also raging on. And what is interesting to see with this fire is it tends to move all over the place. It's swinging around now, coming through to burn here. I was actually going to say that this piece here had remained unburnt, but now the fire is coming along and it's actually coming in from this side as well. Now, in nature, that could happen very often. You have a fire burning in one area or burning in one direction, then the wind direction changes and it starts burning back. A few years ago, I'll never forget, there was a big fire that raged in the mountains north of the town that I'm in. And it was actually started on the other side of the mountain, and it started burning, and everything was still alright. They were doing a backburn. Actually, in other words, a backburn is if the fire is burning this way, they started burning from that side. And they actually tried to reduce the vegetation cover over here, for example, so that the fire would actually lose speed and not burn the houses. Unfortunately, then the wind direction changed and the entire fire swung around and actually started burning towards the residences, towards people's houses. So that was a bit of a stressful time. We had to evacuate, all kinds of things happened, but overall things could have gone a lot worse. Now, looking at this little burnt area here, wonderful, mostly kaput, mostly completely gone now. This is typically what you would expect. If you have a very small area and you're going to burn that area, the entire area is going to be burned. There is not going to be a lot of vegetation left for animals to actually feed on. So let's have a look. If we now go and put in a whole bunch of wildebeest, and we put in some zebra, this is going to probably be too high a density for this small area that has already burnt now. We are probably just going to overgraze this entire area, and the grasses are going to disappear, and eventually the herbivores here are going to die because they're not going to have food. So, in essence, I think PETA should probably get involved with our park here. We are being quite cruel towards our animals. And here, and all in the name of science. And this block as well, it has burned completely. Now, this block we are going to leave. We are not going to put in any animals here to see how this big block that has now almost completely burnt, how that now compares to this overgrazed section in the near future. In the meantime, the grasses over here have also started growing quite well, really mixing now. We have a few herbivores here as well. We've got Thompson's gazelles, we've got white rhino, and then we've got the Marshall eagle, one of Southern Africa's largest eagles. Quite amazing. They look very similar in coloration, at least, to the black-breasted snake eagle, which doesn't have the little black spots on the legs and the chest area there. But these Marshall eagles are extremely strong and known to hunt monitor lizards as well, which in itself is actually quite impressive. Now, we have a number of other animals popping in. We've got savanna hares here, and I only recently, due to SimSafari, actually realized that we have savanna hare as a species in Southern Africa, or at least in South Africa. Now, I was under the impression that was just one of our other two hare species that we have, which they gave a different name to. But in essence, it's actually a different species. We in South Africa have the Cape hare, scrub hare, and the savanna hare, which is an entirely different species from the other two species. So that was something I learned relatively recently. But hares and rabbits, I think I've mentioned this before, very similar, except that hares have what we call precocial young, where they're able to hop around shortly after birth, whereas rabbits generally have their young in warrens, in underground burrows, and from there they're very vulnerable. And then as they get older, they then are able to leave the warren or the burrows, and they then go into the, well, whatever area they are in. So they then run around on their own. We've got some waterbuck here, which are probably just going to die due to hunger. I'm not sure whether it counts as them grazing it over there, although it does appear to be the case. I think they graze whatever is relatively close to them. Now I want to see what happens if we go and overgraze this little pocket over here. But first let's look at Croton, the fever berry here. Apparently it gets eaten by impalas, waterbucks, sable antelope and elephants. Interesting. So we're not going to put any of those ones in. We're just going to put something in that, let's see, prefers the love grass, Erogrostis ciliaris. So oryx, hippos, waterbuck, and all kinds of antelope. Now, waterbuck and oryx are types of antelope, but anyway, I get what they are trying to say here. We're not going to put in waterbuck because they also eat the fever berry. I am actually going to put in a whole bunch of zebra. So let's put a high density of zebra, and we are going to put in buffalo, as they are also typical grazers. So both of these grazer species here are what we call bulk grazers. They go for a large quantity. The buffalo, because they are large, they've got to eat a lot of food, but the zebra eat a lot of quantity, very low quality food, because they are what we call hindgut fermenters. They don't have the 4 stomachs that your ruminants will have, things like your buffalo and your oryx, your all kinds of antelope species. They are ruminants. They've got 4 stomach chambers, but the rhinos and the zebra, for example, they are hindgut fermenters. They've got 1 big stomach chamber, and then they've got the cecum, where most of their digestion takes place. Interesting, there we go. So you can see what happens if you have an area that has burnt, and now a lot of grazers congregate in there and they can't move away from that area. The area gets overgrazed, the food runs out, and eventually this population of zebra and wildebeest will crash. They are going to disappear if we give it enough time. They are totally going to disappear from this island. Over here though, we don't seem to be having any problems yet. The grasses are generally doing quite well. We have an ostrich that magically just popped up. And that sound that was in the background there was one of the sounds of an ostrich. Although the sound that I have mostly heard actually sounds more like lions roaring. It's a deep booming sound that the ostriches also have. I grew up in Oudtshoorn, which is like the ostrich capital of the world, so I heard ostriches quite frequently while staying there. Interesting what we have here. We've got 3 cheetahs, Acinonyx jubatus, the scientific name of them. Now, cheetahs are usually solitary, although you do sometimes get coalitions of brothers, where you've got males of the same litter that then stick together, very often 3 together like this one here. Like this coalition, they would hunt together, enabling them to take down larger prey, and overall just a bit more safety for them in their home range that they have. Now, the grasses here have almost completely taken over this section here, interestingly enough. Here we also have quite a large area completely filled with grasses now. And on the side here, again, also quite normal looking. I want to see what happens. I think this one is dead. These fever berries are mostly dead, actually. There are a few live ones here. I want to see whether hippos, which are wandering around on land here, buffalo, and a whole bunch of other grazers are able to move. I'm going to put them all in this section of the long strip that we've got here, and I want to see whether they can move from this area to another to let this area, the vegetation in this area, recover. So they're going to hectically overgraze this section now. Put in some zebra just for good measure. La la la, having a lot of fun with them. And some wildebeest as well. Now we've got a whole congregation of grazers over here as well. They're going to eat probably all the grass, and then will be forced to move to the northeast. So they're going to move to this part here, and eventually probably make their way along to this side here. And if they do, and they are all congregating on this side, it means that the other section here will be able to recover. We're going to test that at least. On this side, as you can see, things not looking too good here. The grazers have very little food left. I think they are still able to survive because they seem to be eating all the grasses in a certain radius of them, even if they don't have access to it. So this is quite interesting. You can see here they've eaten all the Bermuda grass. As the Bermuda grass makes their way this side, they're eating it, they're killing it, and then they're eventually going to run out of food. Now, Bermuda grass, Cynodon dactylon, this is a grass that is actually very well adapted to grazing. They have what we call stolons, which are creeping above ground stems that anchor themselves. They root as they creep along the soil. And so with them being creeping and a whole connected network of grasses, if this one were to be eaten and it's still part of the individual that's growing over here, it can just regrow this section. They're very well adapted to trampling and to grazing and all the effects of grazers that are in an area. So they're very well adapted to grazing, but constant high pressure grazing like we've got here would get rid even of Bermuda grass. So we're going to let this play out a little bit more, see what happens. In the meantime, we've lost pretty much all our baobabs over here. Just to show you what would happen if we were to bring in elephants into this area. So not even a massive herd of elephants, but it is a very small area over here. And that's what a lot of people do, is if they have a little reserve, they want to put in elephants and they don't realize they need a massive area in order to keep elephants. So eventually the elephants will eat all the vegetation and this is all just going to disappear quite quickly. Elephants need large areas to work in a nature reserve or a national park. Interestingly enough, in this section here where we didn't have any grazers put in after fire, the trees are doing extremely well. Now, since I have just said that we haven't put in grazers into this area to see what happens after fire, let's do that. Let's put in a whole bunch of grazers. We don't want browsers, we want just grazers. Whole bunch of zebra. Creating a hectic Serengeti situation over here. They're probably going to reproduce. I don't want to overdo it too much in this area here. However, we've got a whole bunch of animals. Oh dear, look at this. They're eating everything, and it seems 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 squares away from where the antelope, or 7 squares away from where the antelope are and the wildebeest are. They are grazing that. You can see the long stretch that they have basically grazed all along here, and they're running out of food. And now we tend to see a movement to the northeast. As the animals realize that their food source is gone on this side, they're going to start moving. This is what we call nomadism, where it's not migratory. Migratory means that an animal moves from one area to another and back in a regular, predicted fashion. Nomadic means that they move from an area to another area to another area to another area. No real this way and that, no real to and fro. Instead, they go wherever the food and or water would be. So they are more nomadic in this case, continuously moving depending on what they need, depending on their food source that they are looking for, or water, depending on what they're looking for. In our case, they're looking for food. I also want to throw in another fire, because why not? Let's see, where are we burning? Oh, there we go. Okay, no wonder I couldn't find it. It was a tree that burst into flames, but again, as we had last time, because we don't have any grass around the trees here, the fire didn't spread from the tree and the aloe over to whatever was next to it. So let's put in another fire. Oh look, it's decided to burn this area. Now this area hasn't burned before. We have the population of savanna here on this island. They seem to be, yep, they are indeed multiplying. Now, they can't really run or hop anywhere from here. They can't escape the fire, and the fire is probably going to chase them all into one direction, and then they're going to die. So we're going to see what happens there. Oh, look, a lion's moving along here. So, as expected, this section here has no grass left, really. No living grass left. So now I'm going to see what happens if we put in a bunch of sour plums and a few fever berries. In theory, they should now take over this section here, because they're not getting eaten by the grazers. They would get eaten by browsers like black rhino, which we don't have in this game, or impala or kudu. But because we don't have any browsers on this island, they're probably not going to be affected as severely. They were affected by fire, however, not, I think, by grazers, although we'll find out in a moment. On our rabbit or our hare island over here, burning quite nicely, chasing the hares all over the place, all along to the corners or to the edges. They're probably just going to be turned into hare pie in a moment. We again have all the grazers in this section. They are not moving as much as I would have liked them to, probably because there is still quite a bit of food for them. But you can see they are moving in this direction. The buffalo and warthogs, they've started spreading to the side. And we had, I think, a giraffe just magically popped up over there. We've got a bunch of impala here. They are here because we also have got browse available for them. They are mixed feeders, feeding on graze and browse. There's nothing really happening over here. And this is probably due to a lack of disturbance. Whenever you are in a natural environment, there has to be some degree of disturbance. And in ecology, we talk about the intermediate disturbance hypothesis. If you have an area that has no disturbance whatsoever, so there are barely any herbivores present, there's no fire, there are no locusts, nothing happening, it's not very diverse. I mean, on this island we've got 3 grass species and that's it. On the other hand, if you have an area that is extremely disturbed, as we've got here, most species are not going to be able to survive. They're going to constantly be knocked back by the animals that are present or by too frequent fires, and as a result few species are able to survive under these conditions. The reason we don't have a lot of animals living in this area with no disturbance is because the species that do well under those conditions of no disturbance will outcompete anything else trying to establish. In an area where we have what we call an intermediate or a moderate level of disturbance, as we had on this island at least before we brought in a whole bunch of grazers, this is where you would find the highest diversity. There is some disturbance which knocks back some of the species that would otherwise dominate the landscape, giving everybody a fair chance to establish, but the disturbances are not that frequent that species start dying out. So in a park, at least in Africa, this is what you would be striving for, an intermediate level of disturbance. If you go and keep out fire, like we've had over here, you're not going to have a very diverse park. If you burn too frequently or you have too many grazers, you're not going to have a very diverse park. If, however, you have got intermediate levels, that's where you would have the highest diversity. Now, excluding the fact that we've got way too many grazers over here, that would be a good example. This area has burned recently. We have a few hares present. They seem to have survived the fire and are taking over again. This is actually quite interesting to see. They are slightly overgrazing this area. Now we have overgrazed this section here. We have more or less overgrazed this section here. We've overgrazed this section, though this section is doing quite well. This section hasn't had anything happening to it. And this section, as you can see, lots of animals, but the grass is still doing very, very well. Now, I want to throw in another fire. And here it is, burning where we have had fire before. So it's going to be interesting to see whether this manages to spread quite a bit or just fizzles out. It's burning another marula tree there. Although it's more or less fizzled out to this side. I don't think it's going to spread too far that side. This seems to be fizzling out. It's burned relatively recently. It's going to result in the fire slowing down. So interesting, on this island here, we've basically overgrazed continuously. There's almost nothing left. The population of zebras and wildebeest really have been decimated over here. On this island here, we've got a lot of grazers as well, but the trees here, the knobthorns, seem to be moving in, which is very, very interesting to see. We still have fire raging on this side. It's really burning the entire block, it seems, which is not ideal. When you have a fire, you want some areas that are unburnt so that you could then still support your animals that are living there. However, we are going to let it burn, and then we'll see what happens. Oh dear, and I've started the fire in this section. I didn't really want a fire, but it is going to be interesting to see what happens over here. It's burning the croton, the fever berry over here as well. Interesting, in the game, it is actually classified as a shrub, but it can get up to 10 meters in high rainfall areas. 10 meters, that's 30 feet for my American friends. So 10 meters that's not a shrub, that's a tree. Now, croton, the feverberry here, belongs to the Euphorbiaceae family, the spurge family, consisting of things like euphorbias, which are usually succulent type plants with a very, very poisonous latex in many species. Things like poinsettia, also in the family of the Euphorbiaceae, and then a variety of other species that actually don't have latex at all. But as I said, not really a shrub, it's actually more a tree. So the fire here is picking up speed, it's burning. It's probably going to burn the entire grass sward over here, all the way down It's probably going to stop around here if I had to get about here, I think. It's not really going to make the journey through. This fire is swinging around. It's chasing all the animals, congregating them in this area over here. And on this side, oh, the animals are basically dead. Yay. We've got a few trees that are left on this island here. Sedge has managed to spread here. And on this island, we don't have anything except for the elephants. The elephants are basically just feeding off the grasses that are way over there at the moment. Interesting, this sedge here is Cyperus esculentus, which is a weed. Not weed, a weed. And it is actually invasive across the world, but it does have edible corms. It's got underground storage organs, which allow it to survive the dry season, and you can actually go and eat those. Apparently they are, I think, very much like peanuts, if I'm not mistaken. So, just a little bit of a side note over there. On this side, we have probably doomed this section of the savanna. The grasses that we have here, that's now overgrazed because there are so many grazes that survive the fire. The sausage trees over here, they seem to still be doing quite well. These sausage fruit that we've got here, you can see the flowers over here, they're pollinated by bats. They are very big pollen grains that stick onto the heads of bats as they hover, fruit bats in particular, as they hover in front here and drink the nectar in this flower. So the nectar would be at the central part there, at the bottom there, and the bat would fly here, stick its long tongue in to get the nectar, and in the process get pollen stuck on its head. Things, are not that bad. But at this point, let's have a brief or quick look at what has happened in the park. So in the first block here, we haven't done anything, so it's still the way it was, the red oats grass. We have next to it, we've got some knob thorns that have pretty much died. We've got grasses that have survived, we've got trees that have died, grasses that survived, trees that died, grasses that are doing okay, and then trees that are now being pushed over completely by the elephants. And overall, what we can see here is that trees don't do well in parks like these, in SimSafari at least. In these blocks here, overgrazing has decimated most of the grasses. Baobabs doing a little bit better when you have a larger area for them to constantly die and regenerate. And here, also, overall, grass is decimated due to the grazers, trees starting to establish. Here, where we've got lower density of grazers, grasses doing well. In the larger blocks, as soon as you have larger blocks, they are more resilient to overgrazing. That's a very important thing to keep in mind. If you were to ever manage a conservation area, if you are managing a small area, it is extremely easy to overgraze it. Depending, of course, on which species you put in. Some animals like warthogs and wildebeest, and in South Africa, springbuck or Thompson's gazelles, the Eastern Africa species that's similar to our springbuck, and ostriches as well. They are very prone to overutilizing small areas. And as a result, you really should be cautious when putting them in. They can really easily overgraze small areas. As soon as you have larger areas, it becomes a little bit more resilient, able to bounce back after disturbances, and also not disturbed as hectically. And then when you have, in this case, narrow strip, the animals struggling a bit to move through the system, they constantly want to bugger off into that direction, but instead they should move in this direction, but failing to do so, and as a result the vegetation has suffered. Here where we have fewer animals, vegetation is doing well. Where we have a lot of animals, it's not doing that well. And then of course in our large open area, animals are doing very well. The grasses are doing extremely well. High concentration of herbivores in this area, but it is because as soon as an area gets overgrazed, the animals can move to another area which isn't overgrazed, and this area here can recover. I am going to throw in another curveball, and in this case, heading back to our second SimSafari video that I made, locusts. A nice big plague of locusts, to see what happens when we throw this into the mix. Oh, and you know what? We're going to throw in a drought and a fire as well. The drought has now made that all the water has disappeared, and there's a fire. One shrub has taken flame. Oh, and there we go. No, never mind. Now, in theory, because we are experiencing a drought here, it's burning there as well. Because we are experiencing a drought, it really should burn very easily. The vegetation should be dry, should be nice and flammable. However, it seems to fizzle out more or less. In this case, it may still burn quite a bit here. We'll have to see. The locusts really are spreading quite a bit. I'm going to let this simulation run a bit, and we'll see what happens now after another year. I'll join back with you in November of the 11th year. Okay, we are now in November of year 11. The fire had burnt out about a month ago, and the locusts are still spreading like crazy. Now, locusts are extremely important for rejuvenating the area, although in this case may not have been such a good idea. Now, in the case of savannas, in this case at least, you would have fire as one of the big drivers of rejuvenating the area. If you just leave the grasslands and savannas, particularly in high rainfall areas, the grasses become moribund, meaning that they are dry and not really of any use for the animals. The animals can't eat the dry moribund grass and get nutrients from it. So the fire then burns the moribund material, allowing fresh grass to sprout, and the animals can then eat that. Now, locusts are the plague outbreaks, like the one we've got here, can happen in a variety of landscapes, but they are especially important in your arid and semi-arid environments, where during certain years they come in and they are in plague numbers, eating everything in sight, leaving, as you can see here, apparently devastation in their wake. Now, during a plague outbreak, they very often would go and lay eggs, which will then hatch new individuals, which then form adults, which constantly replenish the flock or the swarm. And that's what we've got over here as well. But the importance of all this is that the vegetation doesn't just get eaten by the grasshoppers and disappear. Instead, the chewed up vegetation, of course, goes through the digestive tract of the locusts and then will get pooped out on the other side. And that poop, that frass, or that dung of the grasshoppers, that's several thousand tons during a plague outbreak, that will help the vegetation to recover extremely quickly. Because before the locust outbreak, the nutrients, the nitrogen and phosphorus and all those things, was generally locked up in the vegetation. Now it is in an easily decomposed form in the dung of the locusts. The dung will then decompose and the nutrients get quickly taken up by the plants, allowing the plants to technically then recover relatively quickly, provided there is water, or rainfall at least. They should then be able to recover quite quickly after a plague outbreak. However, in the case here, there were lots of animals present, so the plants, the grasses at least, were not able to recover. Now, of course, people tend to kill the locusts as soon as an outbreak like this starts. But there was actually a case in North America of the Rocky Mountain locust, which was at one point the most common animal on Earth, with one massive plague swarm being several trillion in number. Yet a few years after that massive swarm occurred, the species was classified as extinct due to the area which they permanently lived in and bred in that was degraded by agriculture and livestock and irrigation, and as a result they didn't have a place to breed and live, and then they just kind of disappeared from the system altogether. And it's hard to imagine, but the most common animal just died out in a matter of a few years, simply because they couldn't survive. So this section here in the corner, that's doing quite well. Now that we don't have any water separating, no islands that are present, the animals can now move wherever they want to. And they can now literally go and seek out greener pastures. But they can't seek out greener pastures if there are no greener pastures. So, we tossed in some more locusts over here. We have another drought taking place. And somewhere there is supposed to be a fire. And there it is, burning this little section of vegetation. Now what we have here now is a classic example of a high disturbance regime. This is not intermediate disturbance. This is a very high level of disturbance, and as a result, very few species are going to survive. We're going to have a few species surviving and nothing really else. I think we've pretty much lost all our elephants that we had in the park. The animals that seem to be doing quite well, oh, there's some elephants, hey, probably the last two. The animals that are doing well are the zebras, the ostriches, the wildebeest, and the buffalo, and oryx as well. Those are basically the species that we've got present in our park in relatively high numbers. They are able to survive in our high disturbance park. If we were to have no disturbances whatsoever in this park, other species would most likely dominate. Shame these two poor hippos. There we go. Just gonna give you some water over here. Oh dear. Okay, never mind. Oh, you know what? We probably do need water in our park, eh? The poor animals are extremely thirsty. So we'll put in a few watering holes. Now, watering holes would be another way to actually force animals to move to different areas, because oh, that cheetah just drowned. All animals need to drink, or most animals need to drink water, and they tend to congregate in areas where you have got water. So if this area here were to be the only water source in the park, all the animals would tend to congregate over here, but they would then overeat the vegetation around it, and that's probably something we need to try in another video in future. However, for now, we've got complete and utter destruction with locusts going everywhere and everything just being quite bad in our park over here. Now, next Friday, we're not going to have a SimSafari video. I'm actually going to start my playthrough of Green Hell, which is set in the Amazonian rainforest. So in the Amazon basin, we're going to have a bit of a survival game in that area there. And my field of expertise is actually forest ecology. So we are going to really delve into ecology of forests when we're looking at Green Hell that we're going to play through. So that's going to be 3 of the 4 Fridays in a month. And the 4th Friday, or one of the 4 Fridays, will then be another SimSafari video. So don't worry, we are going to get more SimSafari videos, but it's just going to be 1 video per month, and then Green Hell in the other 3 weeks of the month. Unfortunately, my work is keeping me quite busy, so I can't make any more than those videos at the moment, at least. So drop a comment down below what you think I should do next in my park. Hopefully it's not as much destruction as we've had here now, but I am open to any suggestions you have. Drop a comment. What would you like me to do in the next park? The best comment will then be selected, and we are going to do that. And then we'll see what we can do in our next session of SimSafari. So join me next Friday as we take a break from the African savanna and we head into South America for the Amazonian rainforest to see what danger and adventure awaits us over there. Until then, stay safe and I will see you soon.